For more on the president's shift on Mexico's tough drug laws, we're joined by Mark Kleiman, a professor of public policy at New York University and author of several books on drug policy. Mark, I remember a while back talking to a former ambassador from Mexico to the United States. So this was when the states like Colorado and Washington were making the move to decriminalize marijuana, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he said something to the effect of, the U.S. is putting pressure on countries like Mexico to do something about the drug trade. While these states take these steps, what gives? He saw it as a double standard. Do you think that that contributed to this move?
Probably did. The main contributor was a decision by the Mexican Supreme Court, which found that possession of cannabis for personal use, and even production for personal use, was a right protected by the Mexican Constitution, and that's, I think, what's put pressure on the government. The announcement was about the minimal change the government could make. So decriminalization of possession up to an ounce, and then some medical marijuana program is well short of any sort of legalization. Right? There won't be a legal supply of cannabis for non-medical use, and that was certainly something under discussion. That's what the case is in Washington and Colorado and Oregon.
Peña Nieto was seen as a traditional opponent of liberalization efforts. We're hearing words like groundbreaking, historic. How dramatic is this move?
I would have said about the minimal move he could take under legal circumstances. So I would say the opposite of dramatic.
Some are saying his public comments show that there's a growing regional disenchantment with this so-called war on drugs. Is there a ripple effect potential?
Yes, there is certainly a willingness to consider changes in drug policy, certainly hemispherically, but also worldwide, that simply wasn't there 10 years ago. 10 years ago, even admitting that cannabinoids might have medical utility was regarded as heretical. Now it's something everybody agrees on. The question is merely how to get the medical research done. Same thing with decriminalization of use. That's now regarded as a relatively conservative position, while 20 years ago it was a completely radical position. So there have certainly been changes. There will certainly be more changes. I think the main players here are likely to be the United States and Canada. Canada seems committed to allowing production for non-medical use and lawful sale. That would be a first for any country in the world. So that's I think where eyes probably ought to focus.
Mark,
Mexico doesn't have very much cannabis consumption. As it is, Canada has quite a lot.
Mark, let me ask you this, because I know you've written about this quite a bit. What is the path forward? I mean, if you were to suggest something to these leaders in these countries, what's the best path forward?
I would want to get rid of the criminal market and get rid of the criminalization of users. I would not want to allow a commercial industry to spring up devoted to selling cannabis, because its best customers will be people who are smoking more than they ought to for their own good. Canada has discussed non-commercial alternatives, including a state monopoly on retail sale. That seems to me like a reasonable way to go. Another reasonable way to go would be cannabis consumers clubs, or permission for production for personal use. Uruguay has embraced both of those options. I think the worst path to follow is the one that's now being followed in the United States, which is commercialization along the lines of alcohol. That wasn't a very good policy for alcohol, isn't a very good policy for alcohol. No reason to think it'll be better for cannabis.
And it's interesting you bring that up, because I was reading in one article today that one pot private equity firm is calculating that legal cannabis, that market in Mexico, could be worth $1.7 billion a year. Does that surprise you?
That seems like a reasonable number. The comparable number for the U.S. would be about 40 or 45 billion. However, if cannabis became legal, the first thing that would happen, unless it were under some very tight control, first thing that would happen is that prices would collapse. And I think there are a lot of people in the U.S. who have dollar signs in their eyes, imagining they're going to get rich, being able to produce something legally and sell it legally and still collect an illegal market price. That's not going to happen. I think we're going to see much lower prices. And that's a substantial threat to public health, because the fraction of kids who use it and the fraction of adults who use it and then wind up having their consumption escape their control is likely to be greater if the stuff is cheaper. We could be looking at joints selling in the U.S. for a quarter or less, and that's probably not a good idea.
Mark Kleiman joining us from New York City. Thanks so much for your analysis.